In 1991, the Institute of the Academy of Sciences for US and Canadian Studies commissioned the Faculty of Applied Mathematics of Processes of Governance of Leningrad University for a research work on the theme Interaction of Great Powers for the period before 2005. The order implied that some interaction models would be drawn up on the basis of the game theory apparatus, and on their basis it would be possible to calculate the politics, evaluate the variance. The apparatus of game theory is one of the directions in probability theory and mathematical statistics. And in the United States in general, it is used for governance towards conflicts, for their modeling. Well, in general, it turns out that, roughly speaking, there are subjects whose behavior is random, and so they somehow interact there. Who will win? But in the interaction, the behavior of subjects, is it random or not random? Each subject strives for some objectives. From where and how these objectives come is the question. In what ways, by what means can these objectives be realized? That is, it turns out that there is a certain level of modeling which turns out to be higher than the apparatus of game theory. And since it became clear that on the basis of the apparatus of game theory, the tasks, works set by the orderer cannot be performed, then the question arose of what works higher than the level of the apparatus of game theory, and how. The result is the sufficiently general theory of governance. The sufficiently general theory of governance is characterized by the fact that it contains these concepts here. The apparatus of game theory. This is one of the applied directions of probability theory and mathematical statistics. First of all, the concept of the entire function of governance was introduced. The entire function of governance is a sequence of actions, the beginning of which gives the identification of a factor of the environment that puts pressure on the psyche and causes the need for governance, and which ends either with the achievement of the intended objectives in relation to this factor, or with a return to the first point. The entire function of governance can be described in varying degrees of detailedness. But if you understand what an entire function of governance is, then you can deploy from it a theory of governance towards anything, with the degree of detailedness that you need. Stages of the entire function. Identification of the factor of the environment that puts pressure on the psyche, causes discomfort, and thereby causes the need for governance. Setting of objectives in relation to this factor, that is, what you want. Further, the questions arise. How to achieve this? How to achieve this is to build a conception of governance. Further, the implementation of the conception of governance in life. The organization of governance in accordance with the conception. In the course of governance, the monitoring of the course of the process. Perhaps it will be necessary to improve the conception, and everything ends with the achievement of the intended objectives and the release of resources that were used in the process of governance, or, if the objectives are not achieved but you are still alive, then you return to the first point and again engage in the setting of objectives, building a new conception, and continuing to act. The sovereignty of any state is always governance according to the entire function. If there is no governance according to the entire function, then there is a loss of sovereignty to a greater or lesser measure. What is lost? How is lost? These are already questions of historical concretics. Since information and algorithmics are recognized as objective categories of being, and not as a product of the subjectivism of this or that person, then any process in nature, in society, in technology can be interpreted as a process of self-governance that flows within the boundaries of hierarchically higher in relation to it, encompassing governance, or as a process of governance. Everything is described by one and the same terminology. Further, the concept is introduced. There are many words, but there are no superfluous ones. Stability of the object of governance in terms of predictability of behavior under the impact of the external environment, internal changes, and governance as such. Briefly, stability in terms of predictability of behavior. So, stability in terms of predictability of behavior. This is a more general understanding of stability than the understanding of stability that is accepted in the majority of the branches of technology, in natural scientific disciplines, in theoretical mechanics, in the theory of automatic control. In what is the essence? Well, let's say we have a certain parameter. This is the time axis. This parameter is almost unchanging. It fluctuates within some limits, and at the moment t1, some impact is exerted on the object, and it goes out of this mode here. And then the question arises, what will happen to it? Now, if there is something like this, this is stability. If there is something like this, or this is like this is also understood as stability, with some reservations. But if there is something like this over here, or this over here, with an increasing amplitude, it is understood as instability in different forms. Well, a simple, understandable example, we take a piece of paper, fold an airplane. Well, a simple task. If you do this with the airplane, will it fly out the window? If you throw it in the direction of the window, then generally, a symmetrically made airplane will fly out the window. Maybe not the first time. You will introduce some corrections, but it will fly out. And if you try to throw a piece of paper in the same way, what will happen to it? Well, first of all, it is unlikely to reach the window, and you can hardly predict the place on the floor where it will fall. Why? Well, because the picture of flows around the airplane is unchanging. It is stable, and you can, on this basis, know that the airplane, with a prescribed trajectory, in general will not go just anywhere. Maybe there will be some deviations from the ideal trajectory, but still, everything will be more or less predictable. But if you throw a sheet of paper, then flows, vortices, break off from the edges of the sheet of paper. They break off in an unpredictable, random way, and therefore the page falls anywhere. That is, the airplane, according to the classics, is stable, but the page is unstable. And when the leaves of the trees fall from a tree in autumn, then you also don't know where they will fall, because the flow pattern is unpredictable. Well, today we were on the beach and saw a hydrofoil boat flying over there, far on the horizon. Have you seen one? A hydrofoil boat is like this. But there is one caveat. These are little submerged wings. That is, they are located near the surface of the water. And now the wing scheme is designed in such a way that if the wing floats, the lift on it drops and it begins to sink. If it sinks, then the lift on it grows and it floats up. And thanks to this circumstance, a boat on low submerged hydrofoils is hydrodynamically stable and can fly above the water surface. Here what is important is that the surface of the water is smooth. But if there is no smooth surface, and there is disturbance, then imagine hitting a wave at the speed of 30 to 40 kilometers per hour and higher. When diving, some have had the experience of flopping on the water with their tummy. It's unpleasant. And here in general, it is the same, only for ship structures. In general, the ship will be severely damaged, but there is also a wish to fly over the agitated sea. How to do it? To fly over the agitated sea, you need to drive the wings deep and raise the body high. Will we fly? Not a chance. Deeply submerged hydrofoils do not have this quality of hydrodynamic stability. And if you simply lengthen the struts, it will not fly. It may come out onto the wings and immediately flop down with its belly, nose or stern. This is already the second question. But if you put a whole bunch of sensors here that will determine the position of the ship, the hull above the water, the position of the wings, roll, trim, and so on, and then set another system of governance, then you will fly both over a smooth water surface and over an agitated sea. The main thing is that the distance between the tops and bottoms of the wave is less than the height of the struts. This is an example of the fact that the task of stability in terms of predictability of behavior of an object has been solved. And thanks to the solution of the task of stability in terms of predictability of the behavior of the object, it is possible to provide stable governance towards an object that is unstable in the usual sense of this term. Another illustration on the theme of the correlation between the conventional understanding of stability and stability in terms of predictability of behavior. Acceleration of free fall, a ball in a bowl. Well, it is clear that if we take it out of the state of equilibrium, then it will vibrate and in the end stop here. Right? And now let's do the opposite. A steel dome, on it a steel ball. Here is the same acceleration of free fall. What will happen? If the dome is very large, then by strength of the fact that there are some micro roughnesses and so on the surface of a seemingly spherical dome, you can find such a place that the ball will not go anywhere. But if the size ratio is approximately the same, what will happen? This is an outdoor view, and if we make a cut, then we can see such a thing. This is the body of the dome. Under the dome we have a hidden magnet. This is about the fact that stability in terms of predictability of behavior, this is a subjective phenomenon. So when I drew a dome and a ball on it, different opinions arose. The first, it will remain at the top if the dimensions are large, and this is true. The second, that it will slide there, provided that there are no restraining factors. But can there be restraining factors? There can be. Here is a restraining factor, a magnet. And it will not go anywhere if the ball is steel. And then there is a magnet, it will not go anywhere from the force field of the magnet. And if we replace the steel ball with a copper or plastic one, then again the effect will be like this. This is an illustration on the theme that the concept of stability in terms of predictability of behavior, under the impact of the external environment, internal changes in the object, and governance as such. It combines both objective and subjective factors. And what for one person is unpredictable, for another person is easily and simply predictable. Why? This is a different question. And the concept of stability in terms of predictability is closely connected with the creative potential of an individual. Because, in general, stability in terms of predictability, it arises as the realization of creative potential in the course of the process of governance. Further, in the sufficiently general theory of governance, the concept of three methods of governance is introduced. Well, the structural method of governance is very understandable for everyone. A structure is a system of governance. It consists of a set of functionally specialized elements. They are connected to each other by channels of informational exchange, energy exchange, and everything else. And the system functions in a certain way so as to provide the desired for us governance. It is possible to operate in a structureless way. But it is not possible everywhere, and the concept of supersystem is introduced. A supersystem is a plurality of elements, each of which self-governs on the basis of that information and algorithmics which is in its memory. They can exchange information and algorithmics with each other, form some kind of interconnections in the process of their own self-governance on the basis of the information and algorithmics that are in the memory of each of them. In supersystems, two more methods of governance are possible. Structureless method of governance. The structureless method of governance is expressed in the fact that we pass a certain informational module through the supersystem. The elements of the supersystem react to this information as to an external factor of the environment, but they react in the process of self-governance in accordance with the information and algorithmics that they have in their memory. And it may turn out that as a result of the passage of this informational module, a certain number of elements will generate a structure that will carry out some process of governance. What is the principal difference? With the structural method of governance, the structure is created before it begins to function precisely as a system of governance. And in the structureless method of governance, the structure arises in the process of self-governance of the elements. And if you are able to assess the probability that the structures you need will arise, that is, to solve the task of stability in terms of predictability of a certain subplurality of elements in the supersystem, then you can govern in a structureless way. You distribute, addresslessly, information in the supersystem in the mode for all. Someone will accept, someone will not accept some element. Some of those who have accepted this information will react to it, some will not. But there is a non-zero chance that one or more structures will emerge in the supersystem that will fulfill the desired by you conception of governance. In order for them to implement this conception of governance, you must take care in advance that there is information and algorithmics. Maybe it will be distributed in different fragments over different elements, but that it is in the supersystem. And then, reacting to this informational module, some plurality of elements will generate certain structures and everything will be fine. Well, then it turns out that structural governance in the life of society is usually born from structureless governance in situations where objectives retain their significance and are stable. Well, to all appearances, the first army was not created as a structure. But at first, there was a people's militia, but the need for defense led to the fact that the people's militia was not completely disbanded, and those who had the corresponding skills, they formed a structure, which was then reproduced as an army. The situation is much the same with fire brigades. But in general, structureless and structural governance, they can solve the same tasks in life. Well, the simplest example is a bus with a conductor. A conductor is a structure. What tasks does it solve? Sell tickets, collect money, give change. If someone asks about stops, the conductor is usually able to tell you where, what, and how. We liquidate the conductor as a position, set up cash desks. The same tasks are solved by the entire random totality of passengers traveling on the bus. Then the question arises, which method is better? But what are the criteria? If you are interested in reliability, that is, all passengers travel with tickets, and guarantees that the conductor will give information about where who should get off, then the conductor is better. If you have commercial interests, then by eliminating the position of conductor, you get some cost savings in the form of his salary. But along with this, the number of bus hoppers increases, and you must increase the number of inspectors. We look at the same situation from the other side. Society as a whole must produce the paper from which the tickets are made. The ticket is received by the passenger, he gets off the bus and throws it, at best, into a trash can. You have the right to pose the question, should society waste natural labor resources in order to produce these tickets? Maybe it is more economically profitable on the scale of society as a whole to put all public transport on the budget and govern it somehow differently without these very commercial indicators. That is, to one and the same governorial question, different answers can be given depending on what you want and what level you are looking. Well, yet another variant is when two supersystems penetrate each other. Then, it seems, if we look from the position of one supersystem, here we have supersystem 1. And inside it, there is supersystem 2. The correlationship between them is such that each element of supersystem 2 belongs to supersystem 1. But not every element of supersystem 1 belongs to supersystem 2. But now suppose that supersystem 1 generates a certain structure, active or inactive, but deployed within the boundaries of supersystem 2. Now, if we look at this from the perspective of supersystem 2, then we may not see this structure. But if it starts working, then we will see that the elements of supersystem 2, seemingly independently of each other, randomly, take actions that turn out to be consistent and corresponding to a certain conception of governance. From the point of view of supersystem 2, the structure does not exist. From the point of view of supersystem 1, the structure exists. And when it's activated, it starts to work. This is governance on the basis of virtual structures. That is, depending on how you look, from one point of view there is no structure, and from another point of view there is a structure. And in large supersystems there is usually a combination of all three methods of governance. Well, this variant, this is those situations when, let's say, a foreign intelligence network is deployed in your state. They give the command, the agent network begins to engage in sabotage and terrorist activities, although before the command was given they seemed to be ordinary citizens of your country who did not stand out in any way and did not differ from others. Here we have the entire function of governance described in stages. I have already named the stages. In principle, everything is on the internet, therefore it is not necessary to write down. Further, theory of governance presupposes an understanding of what an enclosed system is. Moreover, here one must understand that the words enclosed and isolated are not synonyms. That is, enclosure is understood as the interaction of the system of governance and the object of governance, which are connected to each other by chains of feed-forward and feedback lines. Feed-forward lines go from the system of governance to the object of governance, and feedback lines go from the object of governance to the system of governance. This linkage here between the system of governance and the object of governance, this is an enclosed system. Then the particularities begin. In the sufficiently general theory of governance, some of the feed-forward lines go into the environment with which the enclosed system interacts, and some of the feedback lines from the environment go to the system of governance. Well, many specialists in automatic control theory climb the wall from such a definition, since in their versions of theory of governance, feed-forward lines do not go into the environment, and feedback lines do not go from the environment to the system of governance. Even if we turn to primitive practices of governance, such as driving a car, before changing lanes or some kind of maneuver, you indicate a turn by turning on the corresponding signal lights. This is the issuance of information to the external environment about your intentions. That is, these are feed-forward lines that go to the external environment. If you are going to maneuver, you also look what cars, where, what lights are on in them. That is, some information from the environment through the feedback lines enters the system of governance. Well, along with this, there is an interaction of the object of governance with the environment. This is stability in terms of predictability under the impact of the external environment. But here some changes also take place in the object of governance. If the same car consumes fuel, then at some stage you should think about where the nearest gas station is, because if the gas pump dries up somewhere on the road, then you will have some troubles, including possibly with the brains in the car who don't understand what happened. This can also be. Well, the fact that under the impact of governance, it is also necessary to watch how the car behaves, this is also understandable. That is, everything related to the entire function of governance, stability in terms of predictability, methods of governance, it is in some way connected with the processes occurring during the interaction of an enclosed system with its environment. Further, there exist three schemes of governance. Program scheme of governance. It contains only feed-forward lines. the contours of feedback lines are absent. But factually, the program scheme of governance is implemented in automatic washing machines. There is a certain timer, it counts the time, and depending on which second passes, the program performs these or those operations. It turns the drum, fills and drains the water, or turns the drum so that it works in the centrifuge mode and dries the laundry. The program scheme of governance is primitive. But nevertheless, there are situations in which it is quite functionally operable. And there is no need to make an unnecessary fuss with feedback lines and complication of the system of governance. But for the program system of governance, it is required that the conditions in which it is implemented correspond to those for which it is designed. If something unpredictable, unforeseen happens, then there may be curiosities and there may be tragedies. Here is one such curiosity. A competition in ship modeling. A missile boat with programmed governance at the starting line. The task: go the distance and get into the gate. Well, on the way, it also has to make a volley of 4 missiles. The boat breaks down on the way and loses its speed. The wind begins to turn it, and the boat changes its position so that the table of the panel of judges is in the shooting sector. At this time, according to the program which continues to work, the moment of a rocket salvo comes. The first rocket is deployed and flies over the heads of the members of the panel of judges. By the time the second rocket appeared, the entire panel of judges was under the table. This is a breakdown of the program. There was no means to stop it, but in fact there should have been feedback lines which, if the boat stops moving, stop the operation of the program. Further, the program adaptive scheme of governance. The program adaptive scheme of governance includes both feed-forward lines and feedback lines, but it is characterized by the fact that the algorithmics of governance in it is generally unchanging. Or it can switch from one mode to another. Well, like in cars, the power system eco, a minimum of power and ecology at a maximum, or sport, when the dynamics improve, the environmental performance deteriorates. But nevertheless, program adaptive schemes of governance, in all variants, they react only to the changes that have already taken place. If this is some kind of climate control, then the temperature drops, the stove turns on, and it becomes warm. Well, you see, there are such situations when a program adaptive scheme of governance is not able to use the full potential that an enclosed system as a whole possesses. Why? Some changes take place. The sensors do not have zero sensitivity. Until the changes exceed the sensitivity threshold of the sensors will show 0. Further, the sensors transmit information. The performance speed of the information transmission system may also be finite, even if we use, for example, Skype. Then actually, sound and video reach the addressee more slowly than in analogous systems. Further, the system of governance needs some time to process information, to work out a governing impact. Then the governing impact through the chains of feed-forward lines falls on the executive bodies of governance. They also need time to operate, and in general it turns out that even if the system works out the correct governorial decision, it is in a certain way delayed. And while this time of lagging is flowing, the object of governance can go beyond the acceptable limits for deviation from the ideal mode. What to do in such a case? In such cases, you can go to the predictor-corrector scheme of governance. The predictor-corrector scheme of governance works out the governing impact, not only taking into account the already accomplished events. In the course of its work, the prognostics of the behavior of the environment, the behavior of the object, is carried out, and the governing impact is worked out taking into account this prognostics, primarily on its basis. That is, a certain number of feedback lines are closed not through the accomplished past, but through the prognosed future. How does the predictor-corrector scheme work? Here is one of the anecdotes. Firefighters are playing dominoes. They shuffle the bones, assemble them, they look. We are goats. They shuffle the bones, collect them, look. You are goats. The game itself as such does not take place. No one knocks on the table with their knuckles. This is an anecdotal example of how the predictor-corrector scheme works. But in some situations, its proactive effect can prevent big troubles. That is, if you as a politician expect aggression, then the deployment of force groups near the borders, in some cases, can sober up the potential aggressor, and you will not have the need to wage a war as such. I have already told about the methods of governance. In general, it turns out that the toolkit of the sufficiently general theory of governance is a necessary tool in order to analyze current politics, analyze history, and if it is not there, or you don't master it, then in history there is much that you will not see, or you will see, but will incorrectly understand, or perceive it not at all as a social historical phenomenon. But you will see in this a play of some elemental forces, or a convergence of chance happenings. Well, and then questions arise about how the predictor-corrector scheme works, and in general, the task of stability in terms of predictability of behavior is solved. The metaphor tree of knowledge has been known since ancient times. Moreover, the tree of knowledge in the tradition is not a pine tree, but an apple tree. Why? Because in ancient times there was no such concept as an algorithm, and drawing a branching block scheme of an algorithm was problematic. But the crown of the apple tree, it really branches, and among other things, the apple tree bears some kind of fruit. And further the question arises how to interpret the metaphor. This interpretation is proposed. The soil, this is objective reality, texts and other monuments of the culture inherited from past eras. The roots of the tree of knowledge, this is the methodology of cognition. That is, how we, from the flow of all information which is in the world, single out something that is addressed to us, how we comprehend it, and as a result we get new knowledge and new skills which in the past were not in the culture of society and which we also did not possess. In general, all our activity is governance towards something. In engineering, in construction, this is governance towards technologies, creation of technologies. Medicine is governance towards the course of the disease, or the governance towards the process of healing of the organism. These are two different things. Therefore, the first product of the methodology of cognition, this is a certain sufficiently general, in the sense of universality of application, theory of governance. Well, we have become acquainted with its main provisions, although in general, the theme sufficiently general theory of governance is a lesson for at least one semester, every week by theme. There is something to talk about and something to show both in theory, in abstractionism, and in the practice of activity. The crown of the tree, this is applied scientific discipline. The boundaries of the trunk and each of the branches are what in technology is called metrology. In the broadest sense, metrology is the study of how abstractions of a certain theory, its terminological and symbolic apparatus, are connected with real phenomena in life. If there is no metrology, then the activity is impossible. If you catch any scientific theory on the fact that some of its concepts cannot be connected with objective reality, or this connection is not determined, it may be this, it may be that, and you do not control this connection, that is, you cannot set it directly, then this theory is metrologically inconsistent. It explains something plausibly, but it is impossible to use it for the solution of practical tasks. Well, one example is Gumilev's theory of passionarity. What is passionarity? If you analyze his book, Ethnogenesis and Biosphere of the Earth, there are a dozen definitions of passionarity. They are all different. If we have this, then it's impossible. Next, the Marxist political economy. What is a necessary product and what is a surplus product? This is impossible to say univocally. What is necessary labor time and what is surplus labor time is also impossible to say. The transfer of value from means of production to products is an accounting operation called depreciation charges. And it is subject not to some objective laws, but to the legislation in force in the country, which determines the standards for these very depreciation charges. In his work, Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR, Stalin pointed directly to the metrological inconsistency of the political economy of Marxism, proposing that economists abandon such terms as necessary product and surplus product, necessary labor time and surplus labor time, and thereby Stalin himself buried Marxism. Because if metrologically inconsistent political economy is a product of the methodology of dialectical materialism, and it is pseudo-scientific, then the following questions arise. What is wrong with the materialistic dialectic of Marxism? Well, if everything there is not correct, then in Marxism there remains only this carrot. We will build socialism in which everyone will be fed, dressed, live happily, and no one will parasitize on the labor of the near and far. Everything will be fine. But really, scientific methodological support for the construction of socialism, Marxism did not carry and does not carry up to the present time. Therefore, socialism and communism on the basis of Marxism cannot be sovereign. And the fact that the Soviet Union collapsed is largely a consequence of the scientific inconsistency of Marxism. If we turn to what our system of education represents, it does not enable us to go all the way from objective reality to the results of applying any scientific theories in the practice of activity in the solution of these or those problems. Our system of education offers a kind of herbarium of branches. It is somehow inserted into the curriculum, and then students are encouraged to jump from branch to branch, instead of going all the way from objective reality to a useful result. The metrology of the sufficiently general theory of governance and the methodology of cognition and creativity for the majority of people are closed themes. This is something that has no place in their psyche, well, and hence the quality of life. If from the standpoint of the sufficiently general theory of governance, society is considered as a supersystem, then humanity is also a supersystem, consisting of many supersystems, national cultures, peculiar in the cultural regard societies. Then further there arises the question of governance towards everything. And the answer to the question of governance towards everything leads to such a hierarchy. How can you impact society? Show brute force or use it. If the enemy is unable to provide effective resistance, then you will achieve the objective in relation to him. But here there is a saying of the type, I went for wool, I came back shorn. That is, the result is not guaranteed. If you don't feel like fighting, you can destroy your opponent's genetics. 2 or 3 generations will pass, and in general, there will be no one who can resist. The territory of the United States for whites was cleansed by means of firewater and some diseases. But in order to start the processes of biological degeneration in a civilized society, in general it is necessary to invest in something. Therefore, higher than genetics, finance. Since ancient times, there is a saying, where a mighty army will not pass, a donkey laden with gold will pass. Further is what was in the last picture, where this is. How to govern finances. What is a healthy lifestyle? What is not a healthy lifestyle? This is the system of education. It forms the mentality. That is, it gives some kind of factology and interpretation of this factology. This is the third priority of generalized means of governance. Ideologies, creeds, theories of science, all the factology that only exists in society. And if Nabulina was taught that in order to suppress inflation, it is necessary to raise the refinancing rate, and her intellect is disabled, or she, as they said in Soviet times, is hired by world imperialism, then she will do what she does, explaining it by saying that she, according to the theories accepted in economics, is fighting inflation by raising the refinancing rate. The fact that lending interest on the loan is the primary generator of inflation, she may not guess, due to the disconnection of her intellect and by strength of the fact that she studied other theories at the higher educational institution which do not talk about this. Well, the way ideology works is largely subordinated to the historical algorithmic priority, to the psychodynamics that society carries. Psychodynamics, algorithmics of history, are expressed in chronology. And the chronological skeleton of history is the third priority too. But it has a very strong impact on society. Because if we accept the official version of historical science, that the Second World War began on September the 1st, 1939, then Poland appears as an innocent victim of the aggression of Nazi Germany. Questions arise about the role of the Soviet Union in the period of August 1939 and after September the 17th, 1939, when Soviet troops entered the territory of what was then Poland.
После 17 сентября 1939 года, когда советские войска вошли на территорию тогдашней Польши. А что было до того?
What happened before the 1st of September?
В период гражданской войны была и польская интервенция.
During the Civil War, there was also a Polish intervention.
Польская интервенция в советскую Россию.
During the Polish intervention, the territories of Western Belarus and Ukraine were seized from Soviet Russia. Therewith, Lithuania was formed at about the same time, and Vilnius was not the capital of Lithuania, but the Polish city of Vilna. The capital of Lithuania was Kaunas. And if you remember what happened in September 1938, then, in September 1938, the so-called Munich conspiracy took place, when Hitler and the leaders of France and England met in Munich. And France and England, in violation of their allied obligations in relation to Czechoslovakia, gave up Czechoslovakia to the mercy of Germany. Poland and Hungary joined the process of destruction of Czechoslovakia, and, accordingly, if the Second World War is counted from September the 1st, 1939, we will get one history of the Second World War. And if we count from the Munich Agreement, then another history. And Poland is no longer an innocent victim of aggression, but Poland is an accomplice in the Hitlerite coalition. And the fact that one ally decided to attack another, well, this is their internal affair. Also, if you turn to Finnish history, then you will find that Finland did not participate in the Second World War. But against the background of the Second World War, it had 3 wars. The first war is the Winter War of 39-40. According to the Finnish version, the Soviet Union attacked Finland. The second war is a war against the Soviet Union against the background of the war between Hitler Germany and the Soviet Union. When they tried to regain what the Soviet Union, in their opinion, had torn away from them during the Winter War. And the third war is the expulsion of the Nazis from Finland, after it became clear that Germany was losing. But according to the official point of view of Finnish science, Finland did not participate in the Second World War. What took place? But the chronology was simply played with a little. The Winter War, the continuation of the war, and the cleansing of Finland from the Nazis. That's it. Therefore, the historical algorithmic priority, which is expressed in chronology, can do a lot in impacting society. Again, if we understand that the history of the present civilization began with a global geophysical catastrophe that destroyed the past civilization, then we will have many questions on the theme of why the past civilization perished and whether this catastrophe could have been prevented. If we say that the global flood is a myth and nothing like that happened, but just slowly from the biosphere to the present civilizedness, then this is a completely different mentality, especially in the atheistic version, and different prospects in the future. But all this, it turns out to be a methodological priority. This is a teaching about how we cognize the world, that is, how we produce new knowledge. If we are able to produce it, then it is problematic for others to fool our heads, because we can process everything that is offered to us in the quality of truth, and pose a counter-question. While insisting on this, do you yourself understand something, or take us for idiots? And if we do not possess the methodology of cognition and creativity, then we find ourselves in the position of Winnie the Pooh, who is provided with consulting services by an owl. If with us there arises some problem, we go to the owl, and the owl, on the basis of his interests, tells us how to relate to this problem. Therefore, a society where gnoseological culture is at zero or close to zero, it, in principle, cannot be sovereign. Because the methodology of cognition and creativity generates the conception of the historical process. It generates the entire factology of science and applied spheres of activity, the theory on which scientific activity is built. If we return to the thematics of yesterday's conversation, then the methodology of cognition and creativity leads to the canon in each branch of activity. If it is not there, it is impossible to reach the canon in a conscious order. You can solve all particular tasks, but the combination of these particular solutions will be such that you will suffer damage from the accompanying effects up to the point of destruction. Also, the methodology of cognition and creativity determines what happens at the genetic level, what a healthy lifestyle is, how it improves the genetics of a population, what is not a healthy lifestyle, and how it can be used against you in a hybrid war mode. Well, it is also clear that all weapons are also the result of creativity. Tactics are also the result of creativity. Strategy is the result of creativity. That is, if you possess this, you will master everything else. This is a question of time. If this is closed to you, then you are doomed to be a hostage of those who do possess it. Therefore, the irreversibility of the result of the use of means of governance grows from the 6th to the 1st. And the performance speed grows from the 1st to the 6th, because to gather an army and drive it somewhere, this, by historical standards, is an instant. But to change the culture in such a way that every graduate of the school understands what all this is and has mastered this, at least at a basic level that allows him to be a culturally consistent person, this takes time.